Will you consider this? You hear a sermon in church and you're inspired to do something almost out of this world. And Dave Getz is just that somebody who we have found. And you have written something special called Ruth the Musical. But before we get to that, I want to know a little bit more about Dave Getz.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me on today. This is such a privilege to be here in the studio talking about this project, which now has been part of my life for about 14 years. So my story, though, begins and pretty much happens the whole time here in Central Illinois. I was born and raised in Morton, Illinois. I attended Illinois Wesleyan University for my undergrad in music education, and I got hired right back at Morton High School, my alma mater. So I kind of say I've just grown up on Interstate 74, just going back and forth from Morton to Bloomington Normal, and my dad worked here in Peoria. So we did a lot of things over here, and it's been obviously a great place to live and grow professionally as well. And that's kind of pretty much been my whole story.
That's awesome. So you're teaching at Morton High School now.
Yes.
So you're a potter, premier potter or something like that. I'm not exactly sure.
And I do have the special caveat of saying that my mom's great-grandpa was one of the original founders of the Morton pottery itself.
Really?
So, when people ask, what's a potter, I have a little bit of family pride in being able to tell that story.
You should, absolutely. Okay, so you studied music, you studied composition, and then you went to a Sunday sermon, and it was the gospel or just the sermon?
So I actually, when you say I was studying music composition, I actually wasn't at school studying composition. It was always something I've been just dabbling with on my own, even since I was a little kid. And I was home for a school break. It was my senior year, I think probably around Thanksgiving time. And I just heard the sermon on the story of Ruth. And, looking back at your life, a lot of things I now look at and see were kind of coming to a head that this was going to be an impactful moment, and you don't know that at the time, right?
Right.
But the pastor was just teaching on the story of Ruth, and the very first kind of inciting incident, conflict of that story, just really gripped me artistically, kind of thinking like, I bet this would be if this were a show, this would be a great moment for a big song number. And so even in church that day, I just sketched lyrics to I bet this is what that person would have saying if this were a show. And I didn't have dreams of I'm going to turn this into a big production, this is going to be my passion project for the next decade, but it was just one of those ideas that I never really let go of, and it just slowly materialized until it became a full thing.
Well, so share a little bit about the story of Ruth and Naomi.
Yeah, so this is a timeless story. That's actually the first words that you hear in the show is the words timeless. And it's not my story, so I can I can brag about that story because it really touches every intersection point, I think, of the human experience. And it's not told in a way like the Greek myths where these heroes are larger than life and they're doing crazy adventures. These are all conflicts and situations that I think we can all relate to.
So both joyful and sorrowful.
Yeah, I mean, Act 1 takes you through the pits of despair, and just Naomi experiences tragic loss. Ruth experiences they both experience the loss of their husbands. And for Naomi, she's away from her family, her homeland, and she's actually living in Moab, which is where Ruth is from. And so the inciting incident that I first decided to write about was actually from the perspective of Naomi's husband, Elimelech, who, because of a famine in the land of Israel, decides he's going to move his family out of the land of Israel to Moab. And for the Jewish people, that's basically leaving the land of God's promise and protection and provision. And so that was the song I originally wrote, and it's still in the show there. But it kind of sets in motion this idea of what am I going to do? Am I going to trust in God even though there's no food here, I can't provide anything, or am I going to leave this land of promise and
take
go
the
away?
Leap to Moab?
Yeah.
Right.
And so that was the first song I wrote back in 2011, and at the time too, I can even go back and look at my sketches. I sketched out a couple other song titles of maybe this would be another song somebody would sing. But it really didn't become any sort of a serious project until probably 6-7 years later.
So Naomi became Ruth's mother-in-law.
Yeah.
And she suffered loss because her husband died, and both of her sons then. So Ruth's husband and then another son. So there was a triple sorrow there. Why did Ruth go with her mother-in-law? I mean, it was just the human heartstrings tugging towards this woman who's really deeply distressed?
I mean, that's a question I think we have to answer. I try to answer artistically in the show. And that is probably the most famous moment in this story, if you're familiar with it, is Ruth saying to Naomi, "Wherever you will go, I will go. Wherever you will die, I will die." And so you hear that verse is probably the most famous one that gets quoted. But Ruth had another sister-in-law, Orpah, and Orpah stays in Moab and does not go back to Bethlehem with them. Mm-hmm. And the one, I tried to stick pretty to the source material in the show, but the one creative liberty or song I think I added in was Ruth kind of having a soliloquy moment where she's basically saying, like, I don't know Naomi's God, right. I don't know Naomi's land, I don't know Naomi's people, but I am going to be with her, even mm-hmm. though this is going to be completely foreign to me. Because at least what I interpret that is we don't really have confirmation that Ruth knew the God of Israel before joining this family or anything like that. So I did write a song about just trying to explore that question of why is Ruth doing this.
So you use many of the words straight from the Bible and the stories, and then you also wrote the music. You composed the music. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty incredible. And you were how old then when you did this, when you started it?
Yeah, so if it was 2011, I just turned 21 that summer. And again, I've been composing my whole life. So even as a little 8-9-year-old, I would, my piano teacher would give me a song to learn, and I would come back having learned it my own way. And
interesting.
Part of that was, I could play by ear, I could hear something on the radio and, sit down and play it at the piano. So it was very easy for me to not learn the song correctly, but learn it good enough to just make up my own version. And so it really wasn't until early high school that I became really disciplined to, I'd say, like, understand music theory and really figure out, why these dots and dashes and symbols can produce like the stuff that Beethoven and Bach were writing. So I took piano lessons from Dr. Ed Kaiser at Bradley through high school, and he really helped me kind of just understand that, just the why behind music.
Exactly.
And as a kid, especially when it does come kind of naturally to you, it seems like a magic trick, right? There's just you can hear these incredible things, but until you study it, you don't realize, like, it's another language.
And then how do you put it down on paper?
It's a lot of grammar, and it is learning just, why these things work the way they do, how it's organized. And now, being a teacher now for about 13 years, and I teach a lot of composing students. And I try to use the analogy that it's like a big box of Legos, that little kids can put stuff together with no pattern or direction and have a great time, but experienced craftsmen can make replicas of the Empire State Building and the Mona Lisa out of these same Lego bricks.
Without the instructions.
Yeah, probably so. and the kids that are really interested in it will seek out model kits where they can follow the directions. And so I'd say that's kind of where I was at when I started writing this musical. As I was now, I was finishing my degree in music ed. I had spent 4 years at an incredible kind of conservatory of the School of Music at Illinois Wesleyan. And so I was kind of, again, not knowing at the time, but I think I was ready to start a big project like this.
The next, the leap.
The leap.
Well, I noticed that you have the fingers for tickling the ivories.
Yes.
I mean, there's a certain look to pianists, and their fingers are long and cover a lot of territory. So you wrote this, and it premiered 7 years ago. So you're doing things by sevens. Have you noticed that?
Yeah,
it took you 7 years to put this together, then you premiered it, and then another 7 years later. So tell me about the premiere. What was the most difficult part of that whole thing? I know you were concerned if anybody would even show up.
Yeah, I think if you're a creative person, you're always battling that internal conflict of, will my work be appreciated? And I think premiering this in my hometown, I kind of knew I was going to get, my friends would probably come, my family was all going to come, and they were all going to probably tell me it was great. But when you write something of this magnitude, I wanted the feedback and the credibility from people in my field to say, this is not just a side project of a music teacher, but this is actually a credible work of musical theater. So that was I think that's where the nerves came in, is that here, what have these last 7 years been for? Have I, put in all this effort to just write something that's just going to be a nice pat on the back from people that knew me. So that there was that kind of trepidation, but there was also just the excitement of having, completed it. And I think I actually agreed to do the premiere before I'd even written most of the second act of the show.
So you were asked to premiere it?
Oh, no, that's not true. Okay. I asked people basically, if I finish this, will you help me put it on?
Okay.
That was kind of my first ask, was to some people I knew in the community. So I kind of showed them what I had done up to that point, which was probably, I'd say the show is probably like maybe 60% written at that point. And so it's kind of like, is there enough here to have a good product? So when I got the initial thumbs up from them, then I'd say the hardest part of the premiere was finding time to finish writing the show while I was doing the administrative side of recruiting talent and putting rehearsal schedules together, finding venues, and all that stuff. So this time around, it's a lot easier because the show is written, and I don't have to do that work anymore.
Right.
But there's just a lot involved in putting on a musical.
So yeah, not only did you write it, but then you were the director and the producer, and you also are a performer because you were on the piano.
Yeah, I was wearing a lot of hats in 2018.
And you will again this time.
So this time around, I'm going to be the conductor because I've now orchestrated the show for string orchestra. So there's going to be strings, a piano, and expanded choir. We only had 8 people in the chorus last year. I intentionally kept it pretty small, but this time we've expanded the kind of the whole scale of the production. So I don't have to practice the piano this time, but I do have to at least know my music well enough to wave the stick and keep everybody together.
So you had auditions for the premiere, I believe, or did you? Or you
not
just
exactly. It was a lot more kind of word of mouth.
Recruiting?
Recruiting. I knew I needed pretty competent, classically trained voices to sing the lead roles of Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz. So I kind of put out a call to, again, people I knew in the area. Being a local music teacher, most of the people who are doing this sort of thing. And I got the names of 2 ladies who, before I even had called them and they agreed, I had no idea that they were nationally touring opera singers. So Courtney Huffman-Fry and Allison Moit, who ironically both now teach in the same hallway at Bradley University. Not at the time, they weren't even in the same town. But they got connected to me. I reached out, asked them if they wanted to perform in this show. They both said yes, and then I went and read their bios.
and said,
and
whoa.
my jaw just dropped, and I was like, what are they doing agreeing to do the show? Of a rookie composer. I had no credentials to my name at that time, and so the fact that they agreed to join that product is really what made the premiere successful.
Oh, I guess. So they will be returning for...
They will be, yes.
All right.
Very, very fortunate that they enjoyed their experience enough to come back.
And then where did you find the strings? Where are you bringing those people in from?
So those are pretty much all local connections of mine. A lot of them are people, some of them are my former students, some are students who have job shadowed me and have gone on and are either studying or have studied music. A lot of them are just local, people who play in string quartets and co-workers like that. So it's kind of nice to call in a bunch of favors. And the nice thing now is at least I can tell them that there is a fully formed show that has already played once and has been successful.
I'll get to that.
So,
that last time. I'm working on that.
The first time around it was a lot of, again, because I hadn't even written all the songs.
Right.
So it was a lot of trying to convince people, like, I think it'll be good, but we'll have to wait and see. And thankfully, I think it went okay.
Well, so that was in 2018.
Yeah.
And so this year it is at, you'll be performing at 5 Points.
Yeah, 5 Points in Washington.
Okay. So there's a little bit of a difference there. Now, let me back up a little bit. before you even really decided, you already had your toes dipped, but before you decided, you were in a performance at Peoria Players.
Yeah, that's true. So that's kind of I would say, the inciting incident in my story.
Okay.
Because it was 2017. I remember it was about, I'm a big journaler and like New Year's resolution guy. And so, every January I usually go back and reread my past journals from that year and kind of make a plan of attack for the coming year. And I remember telling my wife, like in 2017, I was like, I'm pretty close, to finishing at least like the first act of Ruth. And I said, I either want to commit this year to finishing the show or being in a show. Because I'd never done music theater myself.
All right.
And so it was one of those where I, like, you know what, I should probably get some experience in actually doing community theater before I try to put on my own show. So I decided to make 2017 kind of
the year for that.
Kind of the year for that. So I auditioned for The Hunchback of Notre Dame with Peoria Players, and it was a thrilling experience. It was, really just so fun.
There's a lot of talent.
Oh,
in this
well,
area.
that's what just kind of blew me away was just, and that's just one of our incredible companies we have in this area. But just seeing how a whole bunch of creative people could come together to tell one story, and seeing how just every part, even from the people who weren't on stage, just all the tech and the lighting, the sound, and then to the actors and the directors, and it just really inspired me to want to be a part of that from the inception and say, okay, well, if this is how fun it is to take somebody else's work and elevate it, I want to see what it's like to take something I've written and try to get people around to elevate that.
Okay, well, I like that. That's a good approach. Now, you don't have costumes, though. You don't have period costumes. This is more operatic.
So I tell people I tried to write a musical and I wrote an opera by accident. And I think that just comes from my influence in classical music growing up. I realize I'm probably in the rare company of teenagers who would listen to Beethoven symphonies to inspire me for sporting events. And I've just always been drawn to that style of music. And I think it's because, I was really studying it and I kind of understood it. And I realize it takes a lot of work to listen to classical music if you're not familiar. So I'm grateful for my teachers who helped me just understand and appreciate that kind of music from an early age. So there's a lot of classical influence in my show, but there's also a lot of Broadway that comes in. So some interesting feedback I got after the first run of shows was there's a lot of, someone told me it was visual dissonance to see someone in their early 20s playing something that we associate kind of with this more classical, high classical era. And I took that as a profound compliment. And I think just that this time around, we're actually trying to do a little more efforts to kind of modernize it. We're not going to, I think this time we've talked about, I think we're going to do all black and have maybe some light accented costumes, but not full-blown, period piece outfits. But I think by doing that, it really puts a lot of emphasis on the songs themselves, and it allows the actors to showcase their vocal talent. And as far as we know, I don't think that really distracted from the storytelling.
Well, I think that you have some wonderful ideas, and who knows where you're going to be in another 7 years.
Yeah.
Now, this is going to be July 12th and 13th.
Yes.
All right. So before I forget, how do people get tickets? We still have some time to talk, but I don't want to forget this because...
the first time around in 2018, a friend of mine again helped me produce a website. So it's www.the-Ruth-Musical. It turns out there's actually quite a few musicals that have been written about this story, so it's hard to find a domain, so we call it The Ruth Musical. And there's a link there. You can go there and get tickets.
And get more information.
There will also be tickets available at the door, but I'd encourage you to get them in advance.
So out of all this, I mean, frustrating, and you have some different kinds of songs in there. It's not just all opera. I'm trying to think what... I can't remember. Yeah. It's just one of those days. But what was the most fun song for you to put together? Yeah,
so again, when you have so much time, looking back at 7 years, there's so many different approaches I took to the crafting of the show. And I think once I was in the mode of I knew I was writing unto a performance, that really changed how I was approaching a lot of the the songs, especially in the second half of the show. Once I knew also I had Courtney in the role of Ruth, and I knew what she was capable of, that expanded. It's like an artist being given more colors to work with, because
Exactly.
I knew her, Allison,
You knew her
and
range,
Steve. I
right.
knew what they were all capable of doing, and so I would say a lot of the more songs that really showcase the strength of the vocalists are in that second half of the show. Not that there isn't some big numbers in Act 1. But writing for the choir was also a lot of fun, because writing soprano, alto, tenor, bass. That's where I again leaned into my classical training. There's two kind of choir-only pieces that feature kind of just like a 4-part chorale, like you'd hear Bach write, and then a really contrapuntal madrigal-style song that you'd hear maybe in like the high Renaissance time. So that was kind of a chance for me to kind of leave the more traditional Broadway style and write something that I felt like was my strength.
So what do you want to do from here? Are you going to do anything else? Do you want this to go anywhere farther than Central Illinois, or?
I think
What do
any
you think?
artist who has put this much time into a project would want as many people to see it as possible. And that is my goal for this, would just be and again, to be also respected and feel like it's a credible piece in the canon of just musical theater. I do want this time around also, the big difference also from our 2018 shows was I did those as charity events. I wanted to use the themes of the story of Ruth to highlight nonprofits in our area that I feel were emulating the characters. So I was able to work with Pathway Ministries. I was able to work with the Midwest Food Bank. And they were incredible partners to help me get those original shows off the ground. So this time I'm doing it as a more private, just entrepreneurial effort. And so this, I think, will help me. I'm hoping to be able to use whatever profits I make from this show to eventually make a professional studio album that would make it marketable at a more national level. So I do have goals, that I would like to see this show hit. A lot of that is also dependent on how much time I have to put into it. So I do hope that, I can, with this run, I can get people who may have a creative vision for it, and other directors may say, hey, I think we could really do something with this show. So I'm very open to partnering with other theater companies, local and non, who would wish to see this show really developed as a full stage show.
Well, even some church organizations could probably, would that be a possibility? You got to go back in your journal and read all this stuff to see where you're headed.
Yeah, I think that is an interest. A lot of people, have asked me, since this is a story rooted in the Bible, is it something that only should just churches perform this? And I've always said that was never my intention. I think this is a story for everyone, and I think just the themes are so prevalent and even timely now to this particular cultural moment. The fact that we're dealing with immigration, we're dealing with different racial backgrounds, and figuring out how we're going to resolve these tensions. So I think just anybody can approach the story and find it both accessible to their lives and also just to reflect on our current cultural moment.
Right. Well, it is a story of compassion. It's a story of many things, but I think it's wonderful that, as a young guy, you went to church, and that just inspired you to take the leap, the leap of faith, technically. And
what I also hope, my first year teaching, I was able to start a club for student composers at Morton High School. And every year we give a student composition recital. We've premiered over 90 works. I've been able to partner with all the local universities around here they bring in musicians to play the works of my students. Because I think the act of composition can be a very lonely, isolating business where you're just sitting, with your, it's a computer or a notebook or just something in your instrument, but to actually share that music and share that with, I think, especially with your local community and the people who have inspired you, I think is something profound. It does something, I know it's done something for me, and I hope it's done something for the people who have heard my music. But being able to then also have my students see that I'm still doing this as an adult, and I know a lot of people, this is their main job, is writing shows and trying to get them produced. But that's why you usually see them moving to Chicago or New York City, right? You have to kind of go where the producers are. So I kind of wanted to just say, hey, what if we just did this right here? What if, I didn't wake up in November of 2011 and look at my calendar and say, oh, it's time to start working on my musical.
Right, but you're doing it.
And so I think anybody who has even a small idea and takes that first step can hopefully look at what I'm doing and say, if I just keep building this fire and keep bringing people around who will support me and also I can also encourage them, I think that creates this experience that is incredibly unique for our community.
Well, you're incredible, and you're helping out the next generation, a couple of generations. Thanks for sharing the story of Ruth the Musical, going to be in July at 5 Points. So Dave Getz, thank you. Thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed his story and learning a little bit about the story of Ruth. Stay well.